The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, crystals shattering against the marble floor of our Austin penthouse as David's voice carried through the crack in his office door. "Don't worry about Amanda," he was saying, his tone casual, dismissive. "My wife is already gone, she just doesn't know it yet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The woman's laughter that followed was light, musical, everything. Mine hadn't been in years. I stood frozen in our hallway, designer heels surrounded by glittering fragments, watching rivulets of Dom Pérignon seep into the Persian rug David had insisted we buy for his image. The champagne had been meant to celebrate our 8th wedding anniversary. Instead, it became the soundtrack to my awakening. I'd come home early from my yoga class, excited to surprise him with dinner reservations at the River Terrace, the same restaurant where he'd proposed. The irony wasn't lost on me now. Through the barely open door, I could see him leaning back in his leather chair, phone pressed to his ear, completely relaxed in his certainty that I was safely contained in my predictable routine. "She's been different lately," he continued, unaware that the subject of his conversation stood listening just feet away. "More. I don't know, distant. But trust me, she's not going anywhere. Amanda's too comfortable, too dependent. She couldn't survive a week without me handling everything." My breath caught as the full weight of his words settled over me. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about his fundamental perception of who I was, what I was capable of, what I meant to him. In his mind, I was already gone because I had never really been there as a full person, just as an extension of his life, his success, his image. The woman's voice came through the speaker, sultry and confident. "When will you tell her about us?" "Soon," David replied. "I'm just waiting for the right moment. The promotion should come through next month, and then I'll have everything sorted. New position, new life, new woman. Amanda can keep the house if she wants. I doubt she could afford it anyway without my income." Their conversation continued, mapping out my future as if I were a piece of furniture to be discarded or repositioned according to their convenience. They discussed timelines, logistics, even which of our mutual friends would understand their situation. At no point did either of them consider that I might have thoughts, feelings, or plans of my own. I stepped backward slowly, my movement controlled despite the chaos erupting inside my chest. The broken champagne flute crunched under my heels as I made my way to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding me through the motions of cleaning up the mess. But as I knelt on the marble floor, picking up crystal shards, something fundamental shifted inside me. David was right about one thing. Amanda Harper, the woman who organized his social calendar, who nodded along with his business stories at dinner parties, who had spent years making herself smaller to accommodate his expanding ego, that woman was already gone. But what would rise from her ashes was something he had never bothered to discover, never thought to fear, and certainly never expected to face. The cleaning lady would find the champagne stain in the morning. By then, I had more pressing matters to attend to than maintaining the pristine image of our perfect life. That night, while David worked late at TechFlow Solutions, or so he claimed, I sat at my laptop in our guest bedroom, the glow of the screen illuminating a plan that had been forming in the back of my mind for months. My name is Amanda Harper, though for the past 8 years, I'd been known primarily as David Harper's wife, the supportive spouse who had put her marketing career on indefinite hold to help her ambitious husband build his reputation at Austin's most prestigious tech company. The woman who had transformed from a confident digital marketing specialist into a decorative accessory, perfectly polished and strategically placed to enhance David's professional image. That morning felt like a lifetime ago. I had woken up in our king-sized bed, kissed my husband goodbye as he left for another important client meeting, and planned our anniversary celebration with the naive excitement of someone who still believed in the fairy tale we had constructed together. The woman who had selected that champagne, who had made those dinner reservations, who had carefully chosen the dress hanging in our walk-in closet for tonight's celebration. She belonged to a different world, one where love meant something, more than convenient arrangement. The guest bedroom had become my sanctuary over the past few months, though I hadn't fully understood why until tonight. Ostensibly, I used the space for my yoga practice and the occasional freelance project I took on to keep my skills sharp. David had been supportive of these small ventures, even encouraging them as long as they didn't interfere with my primary role as his partner in social and professional success. What he didn't know was that those freelance projects had evolved into something more substantial, more purposeful, more mine. 3 months ago, I had quietly registered Harper Strategic, consulting as a limited liability company. The paperwork sat in a folder on the desk before me, official and binding and completely unknown to the man sleeping down the hall. The business had grown organically from my frustration with watching David's company struggle with client relationships that I could have managed more effectively, from observing marketing strategies that missed obvious opportunities, from biting my tongue during dinner conversations where I had insights to offer but knew better than to overshadow my husband's expertise. Harper Strategic Consulting existed. In the shadows of my marriage, funded by a separate bank account I had opened using money from various small projects David considered beneath his notice. The account contained $8,000, not enough to fund a major business launch, but sufficient to provide options. More importantly, it represented something David had never considered possible: my independence. The laptop screen displayed my client management system, modest but growing. 4 small businesses in Austin had hired me for digital marketing strategy over the past 6 weeks. Local companies that needed sophisticated online presence but couldn't afford the large agencies David's friends recommended. I had approached each project with the hunger of someone rediscovering her professional identity, the attention to detail of someone who understood that excellence was the only path to credibility. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel. Kim, my closest friend and former colleague from my pre-marriage marketing days. Coffee tomorrow? I have something exciting to discuss. Rachel had been one of the few people who had maintained faith in my professional capabilities even after I stepped back from my career. She ran a successful marketing analytics firm and had been subtly encouraging me to consider returning to the field for years. I typed back quickly. Absolutely. Lot to catch up on. The understatement of the year, but Rachel would understand soon enough. As I worked through the night, updating client files and developing proposals for potential new business, I began to see the shape of what was possible. The skills that had atrophied during my years as David's supportive wife were still there, refined by observation and sharpened by frustration. The network I had built before marriage remained accessible, though dormant. The passion for strategic thinking and creative problem-solving that had drawn me to marketing in the first place had never died, merely been redirected toward managing David's career and our social life. By 3 a.m, I had a preliminary business plan sketched out. Harper Strategic Consulting would specialize in digital marketing strategy for healthcare technology companies, a niche I had identified through David's industry connections but never been allowed to pursue professionally. The market was underserved by agencies that truly understood both the technical complexity and the human emotion involved in healthcare innovation. It was a perfect intersection of my skills, my interests, and my access to industry insights. More importantly, it was something that belonged entirely to me. David returned home around 4, his footsteps heavy on the stairs as he made his way to our bedroom. I heard him pause outside the guest bedroom door, probably noticing the light still on beneath it. For a moment, I expected him to knock, to check on me, to offer some excuse for his lateness. Instead, his footsteps continued down the hall. The sound of our bedroom door closing with quiet finality seemed to echo through the house. I smiled grimly at the metaphor. David was closing doors he didn't even realize were already open. The next morning arrived with the relentless sunshine that made Austin summers legendary. I woke early before David's alarm, and prepared for the day with the methodical precision of someone embarking on a mission. The breakfast routine was familiar: coffee for him, green tea for me, Greek yogurt and berries arranged perfectly on the granite countertop. But underneath the domestic normalcy, everything had changed. David appeared in the kitchen at exactly 7:15, already dressed in the charcoal suit that made him look powerful and successful. He moved through his morning ritual with the efficiency of someone whose life operated on a predictable schedule, checking his phone, reviewing his calendar, gathering the materials he needed for another day of building his empire. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek with the casual affection of habit rather than feeling. "Sorry I was so late last night. The Miller healthcare presentation ran longer than expected, and then Stephen wanted to debrief over drinks." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. Stephen Walsh was David's boss, a man I knew well enough to recognize that he preferred to conduct business during business hours. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But I simply smiled and handed David his coffee, exactly the way he liked it. "I hope it went well," I said, my voice carrying the appropriate mixture of interest and support. The Miller healthcare account could be huge for TechFlow. David's expression brightened at my mention of the client. "Exactly. This could be the account that finally gets me that senior director position. Stephen's been impressed with my client management approach." He paused to scroll through his emails, already shifting his attention away from our conversation. I watched him carefully, noting how easily he accepted my supportive response, how completely he trusted that I would continue playing the role I had perfected over 8 years. The irony that Miller Healthcare would likely become one of my target clients at Harper Strategic Consulting wasn't lost on me, but I kept that observation to myself. "What are your plans for today?" he asked, the question casual and distracted. "Coffee with Rachel, then some yoga. I might work on that small project for the dental practice." I kept my tone light, mentioning only the most innocuous aspects of my actual plans. David nodded absently. "That's nice. It's good that you're keeping busy with little projects like that." The dismissive phrase "little projects" had once stung. Now it simply provided cover for activities he would never think to investigate more deeply. As he gathered his things to leave, David kissed me goodbye with the same casual affection as the morning greeting. "I might be late again tonight," he said. "Big week for the Miller presentation." I smiled and waved from the kitchen window as his Tesla pulled out of our circular driveway, the same gesture I had performed hundreds of times before. But as the car disappeared around the corner, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the day ahead. My coffee with Rachel was scheduled for 9 at Compass Coffee House, a small independent cafe in East Austin that had become a gathering place for creative professionals and entrepreneurs. I chose the location deliberately, far from the polished corporate environments where David conducted his business, but perfectly suited for the conversation I needed to have. Rachel was already waiting when I arrived, her dark hair pulled back. In the efficient ponytail that had become her signature look since launching her analytics firm 3 years ago, she looked up from her laptop as I approached, her smile warm but tinged with curiosity. "You look different," she said, studying my face as I sat down across from her. "More focused, I guess. Like you've made a decision about something." Rachel had always been perceptive, one of the qualities that had made her an excellent colleague and an even better friend. During my marriage to David, she had been diplomatic about the changes she observed in me, supportive without being judgmental about my choices, but I had always sensed her frustration with watching my professional talents go unused. "I have made a decision," I said, ordering a cappuccino from the server before turning back to her. "Several decisions, actually. But first, tell me about this exciting thing you wanted to discuss." Rachel's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm I remembered from our agency days. "Okay, So you know how my firm has been growing steadily over the past year? We've reached the point where I need to expand the team, but I don't want to just hire anyone. I need someone with strategic thinking skills, someone who understands both the analytical side and the creative side of marketing. She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly as if sharing a secret. Amanda, I've been thinking about this for months. I want to offer you a position as senior strategic consultant. It would be part-time initially, flexible schedule, but with the potential to grow into something bigger if you're interested. The offer was exactly what I would have dreamed of 6 months ago. A chance to return to professional marketing with the support of someone who believed in my capabilities. Rachel had no way of knowing that my circumstances had evolved beyond her generous proposal, but her timing was perfect for different reasons. Rachel, that's incredibly flattering, I said carefully, and I'm definitely interested in collaborating with you. But I need to share something with you first. I pulled out my phone and showed her the Harper Strategic Consulting website I had been developing. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the content, taking in the professional portfolio, client testimonials, and strategic approach I had outlined. Amanda, this is incredible, she said, looking up at me with genuine amazement. When did you develop all this? How long have you been working on this? 3 months officially, but really, I've been preparing for this moment for much longer than that. I took a deep breath before continuing. Rachel, my marriage is ending. David doesn't know it yet, but it's over. I discovered last night that he's been having an affair, and more importantly, I realized that he sees me as someone who's already gone, someone who has no value beyond what I provide for his comfort and image. Rachel's expression shifted to concern, then anger on my behalf. Amanda, I'm so sorry. What a complete... She caught herself, probably remembering that despite everything, I was still talking about my husband. It's okay, I said. You can say what you're thinking. David is exactly what you think he is. But here's the thing. Discovering the truth about my marriage has also revealed the truth about myself. I'm not the dependent, directionless woman he thinks I am. I never was. I just lost sight of who I was for a while. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. What do you need? How can I help? The genuine concern in her voice reminded me why our friendship had survived the years when I had withdrawn into David's world. Rachel represented connection to the professional woman I had been. Validation of capabilities I had convinced myself might have been imaginary. I need a strategic partner, I said. Not as an employee, but as a collaborator. Harper Strategic Consulting and your analytics firm could complement each other perfectly. I have leads on several healthcare technology companies that need comprehensive marketing strategies. The projects are too big for me to handle alone, but together we could provide everything they need. Rachel's business mind was already working. I could see it in the way her eyes focused and her posture straightened. Tell me more about these leads. For the next hour, I outlined the market research I had conducted over the past months, the potential client contacts I had identified through David's industry network, and the service offerings I had developed. Rachel contributed insights about analytics integration and client management systems that would elevate the entire approach. By the time we finished our second round of coffee, we had sketched out a partnership agreement that would allow Harper Strategic Consulting to launch with the infrastructure and credibility that Rachel's established firm could provide, while giving her access to new market opportunities and expanded service offerings. This is going to be incredible, Rachel said as we prepared to leave. But Amanda, are you sure you're ready for this? Launching a business while going through a divorce is going to be intense. I gathered my things, thinking about David's voice from the night before, his casual dismissal of my capabilities, his certainty that I would never challenge the life he had constructed for us both. I've been ready for this longer than I realized, I said. The divorce isn't something I'm going through. It's something I'm choosing. There's a difference. As we parted ways outside the coffee shop, Rachel promising to send partnership proposal documents by the end of the week, I felt the first real surge of power I had experienced in years. David thought his wife was already gone, that the woman he had married was simply waiting to be discarded when it became convenient for him. He was absolutely right about one thing: that woman was gone. But what was taking her place was something he had never imagined possible. Something that would force him to reckon with the reality that Amanda Harper had never been his to dismiss in the first place. I drove through the East Austin neighborhoods, past the creative spaces and innovative companies that represented a different kind of success than the corporate towers downtown where David built his reputation. This was where Harper Strategic Consulting would grow, in an environment that valued authenticity over image, substance over status. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. David's name appeared on the screen, probably calling to check in during his lunch break, maintaining the pretense of devoted husband while planning his exit strategy with another woman. I let it go to voicemail. That afternoon, while David believed I was at yoga class, I was actually meeting with Margaret Foster, the chief marketing officer of a prominent healthcare technology company that had been struggling to reach their target demographics effectively. Margaret was a woman in her 50s who had built her career during a time when female executives were even rarer than they were now, and she had a reputation for cutting through corporate nonsense to focus on results. "Ms. Harper," she said, as I entered her office in a sleek building near the Domain, "I have to admit I'm curious about this meeting. Your email mentioned strategic marketing consulting, but you're not with any of the major agencies I'm familiar with." I sat down across from her glass desk, my portfolio containing client work and strategic frameworks that I had developed over sleepless nights while David slept peacefully down the hall. "That's exactly why you should consider working with Harper." "Strategic consulting," I said. "The major agencies are focused on big budgets and bigger egos. I'm focused on understanding your specific challenges and developing solutions that actually work." Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying me with the sharp attention of someone who had learned to assess people quickly and accurately. "Tell me about your background." I had rehearsed this moment, knowing that my professional history would require careful framing. "I have 7 years of experience in digital marketing strategy, including 3 years at Morrison & Associates before. I took time to focus on strategic consulting for smaller firms. What makes my approach unique is the ability to combine high-level strategic thinking with practical implementation, particularly in healthcare technology, where the messaging needs to balance innovation with trust." It wasn't a lie, exactly, though it omitted the years when my marketing skills had been channeled exclusively into supporting David's career. Margaret didn't need to know that my recent client experience came from small projects I had taken on while maintaining the facade of devoted wife. "Show me what you're thinking for our situation specifically," Margaret said, getting straight to the point. For the next 45 minutes, I walked her through an analysis I had prepared based on publicly available information about her company's current marketing efforts. I identified gaps in their digital presence, opportunities for better demographic targeting, and strategic frameworks for connecting with healthcare decision-makers who were increasingly female and increasingly focused on patient outcomes rather than just technological capabilities. Margaret asked probing questions that tested both my technical knowledge and my understanding of healthcare industry dynamics. Each question felt like a small exam, but I found myself energized rather than nervous. This was work that mattered. Work that utilized skills I had been developing even when I didn't realize it. Work that belonged entirely to me. "This is impressive," Margaret said finally. "Your approach addresses concerns we've been struggling with for months. What kind of timeline and budget are we talking about?" The moment felt surreal, negotiating a substantial consulting contract while my husband remained oblivious to my professional resurrection. But as I outlined project phases, deliverables, and fee structures, I felt the same clarity that had emerged the night before when I heard David's true opinion of my capabilities. Margaret and I shook hands on a preliminary agreement that would begin with a month-long strategic assessment, with the potential for ongoing work based on results. The contract would be worth more than twice what David earned in his monthly salary, a fact that would have seemed impossible yesterday but felt completely natural today. As I drove home through the late afternoon Austin traffic, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Hope you had a good day. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I smiled, typing back a response that was both truthful and strategically incomplete. "Great day. Lots accomplished. See you tomorrow." That evening, while David was presumably with his girlfriend planning their future together, I sat in the guest bedroom working on Harper Strategic Consulting's official launch strategy. The business plan had evolved from a vague possibility into a concrete roadmap, complete with financial projections, marketing strategies, and growth timelines that extended far beyond what I had imagined possible just 24 hours earlier. By midnight, I had accomplished more meaningful work than I had in years of organizing David's social calendar and managing our picture-perfect lifestyle. The woman he thought was already gone was just beginning to emerge, and she was nothing like the dependent, comfortable wife he had dismissed so casually. David returned home around 1 in the morning, his footsteps quiet on the stairs as he made his way to our bedroom. This time, he didn't pause outside the guest room door. The light beneath it had become routine enough not to warrant his attention. I listened to the sound of our bedroom door closing and realized with perfect clarity that a chapter of my life was ending while another was beginning. The woman who would face David's eventual confrontation about his affair, who would navigate the divorce proceedings, who would build Harper Strategic Consulting into the success I could envision, she was already here, already planning, already gone from the prison of his expectations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new decisions. But tonight, for the first time in 8 years, I was exactly where I belonged, in my own space, working on my own dreams, accountable only to the woman I was becoming, rather than the woman I had been convinced I should be. Amanda Harper was gone, just as David had said. In her place was someone stronger, clearer, and infinitely more dangerous to his carefully constructed plans than he could possibly imagine. The morning light filtered through the guest bedroom curtains as I finalized the contract with Margaret Foster's company, my signature flowing across the digital document that would officially launch Harper Strategic Consulting into the healthcare technology market. 3 weeks had passed since that night when David's words shattered more than champagne, and in that time, my secret business had transformed from a desperate escape plan into a thriving reality. David's routine remained unchanged, predictable, as clockwork. He left each morning at 7:30 sharp, returned for lunch twice a week, and worked late 4 nights out of 5. What he didn't know was that his girlfriend wasn't the only one benefiting from his extended absences. Every hour he spent away from home was an hour I could dedicate to building something that belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel as I closed my laptop. "Emergency coffee meeting. Something big happened. Can you meet at Compass in 20 minutes?" Her message carried an urgency that immediately caught my attention. Rachel wasn't prone to drama or exaggeration, which meant whatever had prompted this meeting was genuinely significant. I dressed quickly in professional attire that had become my new uniform, dark slacks and a crisp white blouse that made me feel competent and authoritative. The woman staring back at me from the bathroom mirror bore little resemblance to the perfectly groomed wife who had once spent hours preparing for David's corporate events. This version of myself looked focused, determined, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Compass Coffee House was buzzing with morning energy when I arrived. Freelancers and entrepreneurs claiming tables with laptops and ambitious plans. Rachel sat in our usual corner booth, but her expression was unlike anything I'd seen before. Excitement and concern warred across her features as she gestured me over with unusual intensity. "Amanda, sit down," she said before I could even order coffee. "I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to react." I slid into the booth across from her, noting the tension in her shoulders and the way she kept glancing around as if ensuring our privacy. "What's going on?" "You're making me nervous." Rachel leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "You know how I've been working with several tech companies on their marketing analytics? Well, yesterday I got a call from Stephen Walsh at TechFlow Solutions. He wants to hire my firm for a comprehensive analysis of their client management strategies." My stomach dropped as the implications hit me immediately. Stephen Walsh was David's boss, the man who would ultimately decide David's promotion prospects. TechFlow Solutions was the company where David had built his entire professional identity, where he believed his success was guaranteed and his position secure. "That's wonderful for you," I said carefully, though my mind was racing through potential complications. "But I can see why you're concerned about the connection to David." Rachel nodded grimly. "It gets more complicated. Stephen specifically mentioned that they're having issues with client retention in their healthcare technology division. Apparently, several major prospects have been expressing dissatisfaction with their current account management approach." The irony was almost too perfect to believe. David's division, the one he had been so confident would secure his promotion, was struggling with exactly the type of challenges that Harper Strategic Consulting specialized in addressing. But the convergence of my secret business life with David's professional world created dangers I hadn't fully anticipated. "There's more," Rachel continued. "During our preliminary conversation, Stephen mentioned that they're particularly concerned about their relationship with Miller Healthcare. He said their primary contact there has been asking pointed questions about TechFlow's marketing strategy and seems dissatisfied with the direction of the partnership." I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth despite the complexity of the situation. Margaret Foster had clearly been implementing some of the strategic recommendations I'd provided during our initial consultation, and those changes were apparently creating waves that reached all the way back to David's company. "What kind of timeline is Stephen looking at for this analysis?" I asked, already calculating how this development might affect my own plans. "He wants to move quickly. Apparently, there's some urgency around addressing these client relationship issues before they impact major contract renewals." Rachel paused, studying my expression carefully. "Amanda, I know this puts us in a delicate position with David, but this could be exactly the opportunity we need to establish our partnership on a major scale." I sat back in the booth, considering the possibilities and risks that Rachel's news presented. Working with TechFlow Solutions would mean operating directly in David's professional sphere, gathering intelligence about his company's vulnerabilities while he remained completely unaware of my involvement. The ethical implications were complex, but the strategic opportunities were undeniable. "What kind of access would you need for this analysis?" I asked. "Complete client relationship data, internal communications about account management strategies, and interviews with key personnel, including account directors." Rachel's expression grew more serious. "Amanda, if we take this contract, there's a real possibility that our analysis could reveal information about David's performance that might not reflect well on him." The woman I had been 3 weeks ago might have declined Rachel's opportunity, out of loyalty to David, prioritizing his professional success over my own business prospects. But that woman had been operating under the illusion that David valued her contributions and respected her capabilities. The woman sitting in this coffee shop had heard her husband dismiss her worth while planning his exit strategy with another woman. "Let's be very clear about something," I said, my voice steady and resolved. "David made his choice about how to treat our marriage and my value as a partner. I'm not responsible for protecting him from the consequences of his professional decisions, especially when those decisions apparently include the same dismissive attitude toward clients that he's shown toward me." Rachel nodded slowly, recognizing the shift in my perspective. "So, you're saying we should take the contract?" "I'm saying we should take the contract and deliver the most thorough professional analysis possible. If our work reveals areas where TechFlow needs improvement, including in David's division, Then that's information Stephen Walsh deserves to have. I leaned forward, matching Rachel's earlier intensity. But I want to establish some clear boundaries. We handle this engagement with complete professional integrity. No personal agenda, no deliberate sabotage. We simply provide honest assessment based on data and best practices. The decision felt both pragmatic and liberating. For years, I had structured my choices around David's needs and preferences, avoiding any action that might create inconvenience or embarrassment for him. The freedom to prioritize my own business interests while maintaining professional ethics represented a fundamental shift in how I approached decision-making. Rachel extended her hand across the table. Partners? Partners, I confirmed, shaking her hand with a firm grip that sealed our collaboration. Over the next hour, we outlined our approach to the TechFlow engagement, identifying the specific areas where Harper Strategic Consulting's expertise in healthcare technology marketing could complement Rachel's analytical capabilities. The project would require approximately 6 weeks to complete, with regular progress reports to Stephen Walsh and a comprehensive final presentation to TechFlow's senior leadership team. As we finalized our strategy, I found myself genuinely excited about the intellectual challenge the project represented. TechFlow Solutions was a substantial company with complex client relationships and sophisticated technical offerings. Analyzing their marketing effectiveness would require the kind of strategic thinking and industry knowledge I had been developing through my work with smaller clients, but at a scale that would test and expand my capabilities significantly. "There's one more thing we should discuss," Rachel said as we prepared to leave. "This contract is going to require us to formalize our partnership agreement sooner than we originally planned, if we're going to present ourselves as a unified consulting team to Stephen Walsh. We need official documentation of our collaboration." I nodded, having anticipated this necessity. I've already been working with Nicole Reed to establish the legal framework for Harper Strategic Consulting. She can help us draft partnership agreements that protect both our interests while allowing us to operate as a cohesive team. Nicole Reed was an attorney who specialized in small business formation and had been recommended by one of my early clients. Over the past 2 weeks, she had been helping me navigate the legal complexities of establishing a consulting firm, while married to someone who remained unaware of my business activities. The situation required careful attention to asset protection and liability management, particularly given the potential for future divorce proceedings. "How are you handling the financial arrangements?" Rachel asked. "I mean, with David not knowing about the business yet?" The question touched on one of the most complex aspects of my situation. Harper Strategic Consulting operated through business accounts that were separate from the joint finances David and I shared, funded initially by money I had earned through freelance projects he considered insignificant. But as the business grew and contract values increased, the financial implications became more substantial. Nicole has been helping me establish proper documentation for all business income and expenses, I explained. Everything is legitimate and traceable, but kept separate from our joint accounts. When David eventually learns about the business, there won't be any question about the source of funding or the independence of the operation. What I didn't mention to Rachel was the larger financial strategy I had been developing with Nicole's guidance. Harper Strategic Consulting wasn't just a business venture. It was a pathway to financial independence that would allow me to negotiate my divorce from a position of strength rather than dependence. The success of the company would ultimately determine how much leverage I had in protecting my interests when David's affair inevitably came to light. As Rachel and I parted ways outside the coffee shop, she heading to her office to begin preliminary research on TechFlow Solutions, and me returning home to finalize contract details with Margaret Foster, I felt the satisfaction of pieces falling into place according to a plan that was finally my own. The house was empty when I arrived, David having left for his regular lunch meeting with what he claimed were potential clients, but I now suspected was time spent with his girlfriend. The silence that had once felt oppressive now felt liberating. providing space for me to work without pretense or concealment. I settled into the guest bedroom that had become my office, surrounding myself with the documents and devices that represented my emerging professional identity. The contrast with the rest of our house was striking. While the main living areas showcased David's preference for expensive, impressive furnishings that projected success to visitors, this space was entirely functional, designed for productivity, rather than display. My laptop chimed with an incoming video call from Margaret Foster, our weekly strategy session that had become one of the highlights of my professional week. Margaret's direct communication style and strategic thinking challenged me in ways that made every conversation a learning experience. "Amanda," Margaret said as her image appeared on screen, "I wanted to discuss the preliminary results from implementing your recommendations. We're seeing some interesting developments." Over the next 30 minutes, Margaret walked me through the metrics that had emerged from the first phase of our strategic collaboration. Website engagement from healthcare decision-makers had increased by 37%, with particularly strong response rates from female executives in hospital administration roles. More significantly, the messaging adjustments I had recommended were generating inquiries from potential clients who represented exactly the demographic expansion Margaret's company needed to achieve their growth targets. "The most interesting development," Margaret continued, "is that we're getting questions from companies that have been working with other marketing firms. Apparently, our new approach is creating enough of a contrast that current clients of our competitors are reconsidering their arrangements." I felt a flush of professional pride at her report. The strategies I had developed for Margaret's company weren't just theoretical frameworks, but practical approaches that generated measurable results. The validation was particularly meaningful, given that Margaret was known throughout the industry for her demanding standards and direct feedback style. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Margaret said, her expression becoming more serious. "We've been having some challenges with our current technology partner, TechFlow Solutions. Their account management approach doesn't seem aligned with the strategic direction we're pursuing now. I'm wondering if you might have insights about how to address this disconnect." The question created an immediate ethical dilemma. As Margaret's consultant, I had a responsibility to provide advice that served her company's best interests. But, as David's wife, albeit a wife he was planning to discard, I had access to information about TechFlow's internal operations that Margaret couldn't obtain through normal business channels. "Tell me more about the specific issues you're experiencing," I said, choosing to gather information before deciding how much insight to share. Margaret outlined a pattern of communication problems and strategic misalignment that sounded disturbingly familiar. TechFlow's account team, led by David, had apparently been resistant to incorporating the healthcare industry insights that Margaret's team provided, preferring to rely on generic technology marketing approaches that failed to address the unique challenges of medical decision-making environments. "It's frustrating," Margaret continued, "because we know our market better than anyone, but their team keeps pushing strategies that worked for other industries without adapting them for healthcare specifics. When we try to provide feedback, they seem to take it as criticism rather than valuable input." The description perfectly captured David's approach to client relationships as I had observed it during social events and business dinners. He had always been more comfortable talking than listening, more interested in demonstrating his expertise than understanding his clients' unique perspectives. The pattern that had characterized our marriage apparently extended to his professional relationships as well. "Have you considered exploring alternative technology partnerships?" I asked carefully. "We're starting to evaluate other options," Margaret admitted. "But switching providers mid-project is complicated and expensive. I'd prefer to find a way to improve the current relationship if possible." I weighed my response carefully, considering the multiple layers of my connection to this situation. As Margaret's consultant, I needed to provide honest advice based on my professional assessment. As someone with intimate knowledge of TechFlow's internal dynamics, through my relationship with David, I had insights that could be valuable. As a woman preparing to divorce David, I had personal motivations that could potentially cloud my judgment. In my experience, I said finally, the most effective approach is often to escalate the conversation to senior leadership at TechFlow. Sometimes account teams become entrenched in particular approaches, and input from their management can help refocus priorities on client satisfaction rather than internal preferences. It was advice that served Margaret's interests while potentially creating accountability for David's performance that might not otherwise occur. If Margaret requested a meeting with Stephen Walsh to discuss her concerns about TechFlow's account management, it would inevitably lead to scrutiny of David's approach to the relationship. "That's exactly what I was thinking," Margaret said, her relief evident. "Would you be willing to help me prepare for that conversation? I want to make sure I'm presenting our concerns in a way that focuses on solutions rather than just problems." I agreed immediately, recognizing the opportunity to provide value to Margaret, while potentially gaining insight into how Stephen Walsh responded to client feedback about David's division. The ethical complexity of the situation was undeniable. But my primary obligation was to Margaret as my client, not to David as my husband who was planning to leave me anyway. After ending my call with Margaret, I sat quietly in the guest bedroom contemplating the convergence of circumstances that was bringing my secret business life into direct contact with David's professional world. The woman he thought was already gone was not only still present, but actively operating in his sphere of influence, gathering information and building relationships that he remained completely unaware of. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Stephen wants to meet for drinks after work today. Might be about the promotion. Don't wait up if I'm late." The irony was exquisite. While David celebrated what he believed was progress toward his promotion, Stephen Walsh was simultaneously hiring Rachel's firm to analyze the exact performance issues that Margaret Foster would soon be escalating. The convergence of these developments suggested that David's professional situation was far more precarious than he realized. I responded to his text with appropriate enthusiasm. "That's wonderful. Hope it goes well. I'll probably be working late on my project anyway." The project was, of course, the rapidly expanding consulting business that would soon be operating directly within David's professional ecosystem. But he had trained himself to dismiss my activities as inconsequential, which meant he wouldn't ask follow-up questions about the nature or scope of my work. That evening, while David was presumably celebrating his bright future with Stephen Walsh and possibly his girlfriend, I worked late into the night preparing materials for Margaret's upcoming conversation with TechFlow leadership. The presentation I developed highlighted the strategic opportunities that Margaret's company represented, while diplomatically outlining the communication improvements that would enhance the partnership's effectiveness. Each slide I created felt like a small act of rebellion against the dismissive attitude David had shown toward my capabilities over 8 years of marriage. The strategic thinking he had never bothered to recognize, the industry insights he had never thought to value, the communication skills he had never considered significant. All of it was being deployed in service of objectives that would ultimately impact his professional standing. But beneath the personal satisfaction was a deeper sense of professional fulfillment. The work I was doing for Margaret represented exactly the kind of strategic consulting I had always wanted to pursue, challenging problems that required creative solutions and deep industry knowledge. Harper Strategic Consulting was becoming the career I had imagined before I allowed David's vision of our life together to take precedence over my own ambitions. By the time David returned home around midnight, I had completed a comprehensive analysis of TechFlow's account management approach, based on Margaret's feedback and my own observations of David's professional style over the years. The document was both strategically valuable for Margaret and personally illuminating for me, crystallizing patterns of behavior that I had noticed but never fully analyzed. I heard David's footsteps on the stairs, heavier than usual, suggesting that his meeting with Stephen Walsh had involved more alcohol than business discussion. He paused outside the guest bedroom door, and for a moment I thought he might knock, might actually inquire about my late-night activities. Instead, his footsteps continued down the hall, followed by the familiar sound of our bedroom door closing. The casual dismissal of my presence, the assumption that whatever I was doing couldn't possibly be important enough to warrant his attention, felt like a gift rather than an insult. His indifference to my activities was providing exactly the cover I needed to build something that would ultimately redefine the balance of power between us. As I saved my work and prepared for bed, I reflected on how completely my perspective had shifted over the past 3 weeks. The woman who had discovered David's affair through his careless conversation had been devastated by his betrayal and dismissal. The woman who now turned off her laptop after completing strategic consulting work that would directly impact his professional future felt only determination and clarity. Amanda Harper was indeed gone, just as David had predicted. But the woman who had taken her place was someone he had never imagined possible. Someone who understood his weaknesses better than he knew them himself. Someone who was building a future that didn't require his permission or approval. Tomorrow would bring new developments in the complex web of professional and personal relationships that my business activities were creating. But tonight, I fell asleep with the satisfaction of knowing that every hour David spent planning his exit strategy was an hour I had used to build something that belonged entirely to me, something that would ensure I emerged from our marriage stronger and more independent than I had ever been before. The foundation was set, the pieces were in motion, and David remained completely unaware that the woman he thought was waiting passively for his decision about their future was actually orchestrating a transformation that would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about power, control, and the cost of underestimating someone you've dismissed as inconsequential. The knock on our front door came at precisely 9 a.m, interrupting my review of the tech flow analysis that Rachel and I had been developing over the past 2 weeks. David had left for work an hour earlier, his mood noticeably lighter, since Stephen Walsh had confirmed the timeline for his promotion review. What he didn't know was that same promotion was becoming increasingly unlikely as our investigation revealed systematic issues with client satisfaction in his division. I opened the door to find a courier holding an overnight envelope addressed to me personally, not to Mrs. David Harper as most mail arrived. The return address showed Nicole Reed's law firm, and the weight of the package suggested substantial documentation inside. My attorney had been working on several matters simultaneously, from formalizing my business structure to preparing preliminary divorce documents that I could file when the timing became strategically advantageous. Amanda Harper? The courier confirmed, and I signed for the package with a signature that felt increasingly like my authentic identity rather than a borrowed version of David's name. Inside the envelope were 3 sets of documents that represented different aspects of the independence I had been building systematically over the past month. The first was the formal partnership agreement between Harper Strategic Consulting and Rachel's analytics firm, creating a legal framework for our collaboration that would allow us to pursue larger contracts with shared resources and expertise. The second was a comprehensive asset analysis that Nicole had prepared, documenting my separate business accounts and establishing clear ownership of intellectual property I had developed independently of my marriage to David. The third document made my breath catch. It was a preliminary financial disclosure form that would be required for divorce proceedings, and the numbers Nicole had compiled told a story that even I hadn't fully grasped until seeing it laid out in black and white. Harper Strategic Consulting had generated $47,000 in revenue over the past month alone. The Margaret Foster contract had led to referrals from 3 other healthcare technology companies, each requiring strategic consulting that commanded premium rates. My business account, which had started with $8,000 in freelance earnings, now contained over $60,000 in legitimate business income that belonged entirely to me. More significantly, Nicole's analysis revealed that my contributions to David's career success over 8 years had created what she termed enhanced earning capacity that would be considered in any divorce settlement. The networking, client, relationship management, and strategic support I had provided weren't just wifely duties, but professional services that had quantifiable value. According to Nicole's calculations, my indirect contributions to David's income warranted consideration for spousal support even beyond the standard 50-50 asset division. I set the documents aside and returned to my laptop, where the tech flow analysis demanded immediate attention. Rachel and I were scheduled to present our preliminary findings to Stephen Walsh that afternoon, and the implications of our research would likely reach far beyond David's individual performance issues. The data we had compiled painted a troubling picture of systematic problems in TechFlow's approach to healthcare clients. Response times to client inquiries averaged 48 hours longer than industry standards. Strategic recommendations often failed to incorporate healthcare-specific regulatory considerations that our analysis showed were critical to client satisfaction. Most damaging exit interviews with former healthcare clients revealed a consistent pattern of feeling dismissed when they attempted to provide industry expertise to their TechFlow account teams. David's division wasn't the only area with problems, but it was definitely the most problematic. His approach to client relationships, which had seemed charming and confident in social settings, appeared domineering and inflexible when viewed through the lens of client feedback data. Healthcare executives, many of whom were women with decades of industry experience, consistently reported feeling patronized by account managers who prioritized technical demonstrations over strategic understanding. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Final prep meeting in 30 minutes. Stephen moved our presentation up to 2 p.m. The earlier timeline added pressure, but also opportunity. If our presentation influenced Stephen's decision-making before David's promotion review, it could significantly impact the trajectory of his career without appearing to be personally motivated. I gathered my materials and drove to Rachel's office, a converted warehouse space in East Austin that buzzed with creative energy. Her team had expanded over the past month to include 2 additional analysts, growth that was funded partly by the TechFlow contract and partly by spillover work from Harper Strategic Consulting's client referrals. Our partnership was proving mutually beneficial in ways that exceeded both our initial projections. "Are you ready for this?" Rachel asked as I joined her in the conference room where she had been reviewing our presentation materials. Charts and graphs covered the walls, documenting client satisfaction trends that told an unambiguous story about TechFlow's performance challenges. "I'm ready," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Though I have to admit, there's something surreal about presenting an analysis that could directly impact David's career while he has no idea I'm involved. Rachel studied my expression carefully. "Are you having second thoughts about moving forward? Because we can still adjust our approach if you're uncomfortable with the personal implications." I considered her question seriously, weighing the professional obligations we had to Stephen Walsh against the personal dynamics with David that complicated every aspect of this situation. The ethical framework was complex, but my primary responsibility was clear. Our job is to provide Stephen with accurate information that helps him make informed decisions about his company's performance, I said finally. If that information happens to reveal problems with David's approach to client management, that's a consequence of his professional choices, not our personal agenda. The distinction felt important, even as I acknowledged that my feelings about David's treatment of our marriage inevitably colored my perspective on his professional behavior. But the data we had compiled was objective, the client feedback was documented, and the strategic recommendations we were making would benefit TechFlow's overall performance regardless of how they affected David individually. We spent the next hour rehearsing our presentation, anticipating questions Stephen might ask, and ensuring our recommendations focused on systematic improvements rather than individual blame. The approach would allow Stephen to draw his own conclusions about personnel decisions, while providing him with clear evidence of where changes needed to occur. At precisely 2 o'clock, Rachel and I arrived at TechFlow Solutions' downtown headquarters, a gleaming tower that represented Austin's emergence as a major technology hub. I had been in this building countless times for David's corporate events, but never as a professional consultant with my own agenda and expertise to offer. The contrast felt symbolic of how completely my role had transformed. Stephen Walsh's office occupied a corner of the 20th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Austin's skyline and the Colorado River beyond. He was a man in his early 50s who had built TechFlow from a small startup into a major player in enterprise software solutions, and his reputation for direct communication and strategic thinking had made him one of Austin's most respected technology executives. "Ms. Kim, Ms. Harper," he said, standing to greet us with firm handshakes. "Thank you for accommodating the schedule change. I'm eager to hear what your analysis has revealed." Rachel took the lead, walking Stephen through our methodology and data collection process, while I prepared to present the specific findings related to healthcare client relationships. As she spoke, I noticed Stephen taking detailed notes and asking probing questions that demonstrated both his familiarity with the issues we were addressing and his concern about their implications for TechFlow's growth strategy. The healthcare technology market represents our fastest-growing segment, Stephen explained when Rachel finished her overview. But our client retention rates in that sector have been inconsistent compared to our performance in other industries. I need to understand whether this reflects market dynamics or internal performance issues. I stepped forward to begin my portion of the presentation, feeling the familiar surge of confidence that came with discussing work I had mastered thoroughly. "Mr. Walsh, our analysis suggests that the retention challenges stem primarily from misalignment between TechFlow's standard account management approach and the specific requirements of healthcare decision-makers." For the next 20 minutes, I walked Stephen through our findings, highlighting the communication gaps, strategic oversights, and relationship management issues that were driving client dissatisfaction. I presented specific examples without naming individual account managers, allowing the data to speak for itself, while Stephen connected the patterns to his own knowledge of internal personnel. "These findings are concerning," Stephen said when I finished, "but they're also actionable, which I appreciate. What are your recommendations for addressing these systematic issues?" Rachel and I had anticipated this question and prepared a comprehensive improvement plan that addressed both immediate tactical changes and longer-term strategic adjustments. The recommendations included enhanced training for account managers on healthcare industry dynamics, revised communication protocols that prioritized client expertise, and regular client satisfaction monitoring that would identify problems before they reached crisis levels. Implementation of these changes should begin immediately, I concluded, particularly with your highest-value healthcare clients who may be considering alternative partnerships. Stephen nodded grimly. Speaking of which, I received a call yesterday from Margaret Foster at Miller Healthcare. She's requested a meeting to discuss concerns about our account management approach. Given your analysis, I suspect her feedback will align with your findings. The mention of Margaret's name created a moment of internal tension, but I maintained my professional composure while noting the validation it provided for our analysis. Margaret was following through on the advice I had given her as her consultant, which would likely lead to exactly the kind of accountability conversation that David's performance warranted. Client feedback sessions can be valuable opportunities to demonstrate responsiveness to concerns, I suggested. If Ms. Foster's feedback aligns with our analysis, it could provide specific examples that help guide your improvement efforts. Stephen spent another 30 minutes reviewing our recommendations and discussing implementation timelines. By the end of our meeting, he had committed to immediate changes in account management protocols and scheduled individual performance reviews with all healthcare division personnel. The implications for David's promotion prospects were clear, though Stephen diplomatically avoided naming specific employees whose performance would be scrutinized. "This analysis has been invaluable," Stephen said as our meeting concluded. "I'd like to retain your services for ongoing monitoring of these improvements. Can you provide a proposal for quarterly assessments over the next year? Rachel and I exchanged glances, recognizing the significant opportunity he was offering. A year-long contract with TechFlow Solutions would establish our partnership as a major player in Austin's consulting market while providing sustained insight into David's professional situation. We'd be honored to continue working with TechFlow, Rachel replied. We'll have a detailed proposal to you within 48 hours. As we gathered our materials and prepared to leave, Stephen made one final comment that sent a chill down my spine. I appreciate your discretion in handling sensitive performance information. As you can imagine, personnel decisions based on this analysis will need to be managed carefully to protect both individual privacy and company interests. The statement was professionally appropriate, but it also served as a reminder that our work could have consequences for real people's careers and livelihoods. David might be a husband who had betrayed me and dismissed my worth, but he was also a professional whose income supported our household and whose reputation would affect his future opportunities. I pushed the moment of doubt aside as Rachel, and I left TechFlow's offices. David had made his choices about how to treat our marriage and my contributions. The consequences of those choices, both personal and professional, were his responsibility to manage. The drive back to Rachel's office gave us time to process what had just occurred and plan our next steps. The TechFlow engagement had exceeded our expectations in terms of both scope and strategic importance, positioning our partnership for growth that neither of us had anticipated when we first discussed collaboration over coffee. That was incredible, Rachel said as we pulled into her office parking lot. Stephen Walsh is going to become one of our most important references. A successful engagement with TechFlow will open doors throughout Austin's technology community. I nodded, feeling the satisfaction of professional achievement mixed with anticipation about how these developments would ultimately affect my personal situation. The financial independence that Harper Strategic Consulting was providing would allow me to negotiate my divorce from a position of strength, but the timing of David's professional difficulties could either complicate or simplify those negotiations, depending on how events unfolded. There's something else we need to discuss, I said as we entered Rachel's office. The success of our business partnership is creating some complex personal dynamics that we should address directly. Rachel settled into her desk chair and gave me her full attention. You mean the fact that our work could negatively impact David's career prospects? Exactly. I want to make sure we're both comfortable with the ethical boundaries of this situation. Our professional obligations are clear, but the personal implications are more complicated. We spent the next hour discussing the principles that would guide our decision-making as our business activities continued to intersect with David's professional world. The conversation reinforced my confidence in Rachel as both a business partner and a person whose judgment I could trust when navigating complex situations. By the time I returned home that evening, David was already there, pacing around our living room with nervous energy that immediately caught my attention. His expression was tense, and he barely acknowledged my arrival before launching into an agitated monologue about his day. Stephen Walsh called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning, he said, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized as extreme stress. Apparently, some consulting firm has been analyzing our healthcare division, and there are questions about our client management approach. I set down my purse and removed my jacket, maintaining an expression of supportive concern while internally processing the irony of his update. That sounds stressful. Did Stephen give you any details about what the consultants found? Not specifics, but he mentioned client satisfaction issues and communication problems. Amanda, this could seriously impact my promotion review. If there are problems with our healthcare accounts, Stephen might hold me responsible since I manage the largest clients in that division. The panic in David's voice was genuine, and for a moment I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for the anxiety he was experiencing. But then I remembered his casual dismissal of my worth, his plans to discard me when it became convenient, and his ongoing affair with someone who thought my marriage was already over. I'm sure you'll be able to address any concerns Stephen raises, I said, my tone supportive but neutral. You've always been good at managing client relationships. David looked at me sharply, as if searching for hidden meaning in my words, but my expression remained carefully encouraging. The woman he had trained to support his career was still performing that role, even as the woman he didn't know existed was systematically dismantling the foundation of his professional confidence. There's something else, David continued, his agitation increasing. Margaret Foster from Miller Healthcare has requested a meeting with Stephen. Apparently, she has concerns about our partnership that she wants to discuss at the senior leadership level. I made appropriate sounds of sympathy while marveling at how perfectly the various elements of my strategy were converging. Margaret was following the advice I had given her as her consultant, which would provide Stephen with specific examples of the problems our analysis had identified, which would likely result in accountability measures that would affect David's performance. Review. Maybe this is an opportunity to demonstrate your problem-solving skills, I suggested. If you can help resolve whatever concerns Margaret has, it might actually strengthen your position with Stephen. David's expression brightened slightly at this perspective, and I felt a familiar pang of recognition for the man I had once loved, the one who had existed before ambition and entitlement had corrupted his ability to see other people clearly. You're right, he said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. This could be a chance to show leadership during a challenging situation. I nodded encouragingly, while noting the irony that his wife was simultaneously advising him on how to handle a crisis that his wife had helped to create. The complexity of the situation was almost dizzying, but my role remained clear. Provide the support that maintained my cover while building the independence that would ultimately free me from this performance. That night, as David worked late, in his office preparing for his meeting with Stephen, I sat in the guest bedroom finalizing the quarterly assessment proposal that Rachel and I would submit to TechFlow. The document outlined a comprehensive monitoring system that would track improvements in client satisfaction while identifying emerging issues before they reached crisis levels. The proposal also included a detailed budget that would generate substantial revenue for our partnership over the next year. The financial independence I had been building systematically was accelerating beyond my original projections, creating possibilities for my post-divorce life that exceeded anything I had imagined when I first heard David's dismissive words about my capabilities. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Hey, beautiful, I miss you. When can we have our real celebration dinner? David said he might be working late all week with some work crisis. Lucky us. K. I stared at the message, realizing that David's girlfriend had accidentally sent me a text intended for him. The casual intimacy of her tone, the assumption that David's work problems were an inconvenience to their relationship rather than a serious professional challenge, provided a perfect window into how she perceived her role in his life. More importantly, the message confirmed that David had been sharing details about his work situation with her, possibly including information about the consulting analysis that could affect his performance review. The potential security implications were significant, but the personal implications were more immediately relevant. I forwarded the message to Nicole Reed with a brief note explaining its significance for documenting David's affair and his careless handling of confidential business information. Then I blocked the number and deleted the message from my phone, erasing the evidence of David's girlfriend's mistake. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on how the various elements of my situation were creating unexpected opportunities for strategic advantage. David's professional crisis was intensifying at exactly the moment when my business success was providing maximum leverage for divorce negotiations. His girlfriend's careless communication had provided documented evidence of their relationship that would be valuable in legal proceedings. Most significantly, the woman he thought was already gone was not only still present, but actively shaping the circumstances that would determine his professional future. The transformation that had begun with champagne shattering on marble floors was approaching its culmination, and David remained completely unaware of how fundamentally the balance of power between us had shifted. Tomorrow would bring Stephen Walsh's meeting with David, Margaret Foster's feedback session, and the next phase of developments that would determine how quickly my careful planning would translate into the independence I had been building toward. But tonight, I fell asleep with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every piece of my strategy was moving exactly according to the plan that David had never imagined I was capable of creating. The woman who had once organized his social calendar and managed his professional image was now orchestrating the circumstances that would ultimately define both our futures. And unlike David's careless approach to managing sensitive relationships, my planning had been thorough, strategic, and designed to ensure that when the final confrontation came, I would be operating from a position of strength that he could never have anticipated. The sound of David's car pulling out of our driveway at 6 a.m. woke me from restless sleep. Through the guest bedroom window, I watched his Tesla disappear around the corner with unusual urgency, 2 hours earlier than his normal departure time. His meeting with Stephen Walsh was scheduled for 8 o'clock, but his early departure suggested anxiety that had likely kept him awake most of the night. I reached for my phone and found 3 missed calls from Rachel, along with a text message marked urgent. "Victoria Santos wants to meet with us today. She heard about our tech flow success and has a proposition that could change everything. Can you be at my office by 9? Victoria Santos was a name that commanded immediate attention in Austin's business community. As managing partner of Santos Venture Capital, she had built a reputation for identifying promising consulting firms and providing the strategic investment that allowed them to scale rapidly. Her interest in our partnership represented an opportunity that neither Rachel nor I had dared to imagine when we first discussed collaboration. I dressed quickly in my most professional attire, a navy suit that projected competence and authority. The woman looking back at me from the bathroom mirror bore no resemblance to the supportive wife who had once selected outfits based on David's preferences for corporate events. This version of myself looked ready to negotiate deals and make decisions that would shape my future according to my own vision. The drive to Rachel's office gave me time to process the surreal nature of my situation. While David was likely sitting in Stephen Walsh's office learning about performance issues that my analysis had identified, I was preparing for a meeting that could establish my consulting business as a major player in Austin's professional services market. The timing wasn't coincidental, but rather the result of careful planning that was finally converging into concrete opportunities. Rachel was waiting in her conference room when I arrived, her expression mixing excitement with nervous energy. Victoria Santos sat across from her, a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she was accustomed to making decisions quickly and accurately. "Amanda," Victoria said, standing to greet me with a firm handshake. "Rachel has been telling me about your partnership and the impressive results you've achieved in just a few weeks. I'm particularly interested in your healthcare technology, expertise, and the client relationships you've developed." I took a seat at the conference table, noting the professional materials Victoria had spread before her, including what appeared to be financial projections and market analysis documents. The level of preparation suggested this wasn't a casual exploratory meeting, but a serious business proposition. "Thank you for your interest in our work," I replied. "We've been fortunate to identify an underserved niche in healthcare technology, consulting, and the market response has exceeded our expectations." Victoria smiled approvingly at my measured response. "I've done my research on both of you. Rachel's analytics firm has solid fundamentals and impressive growth metrics. Your healthcare technology specialization addresses a gap that larger consulting firms have struggled to fill effectively. Together, you're positioned to capture significant market share if you have the resources to scale appropriately." She opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a document that made my breath catch. It was a term sheet for venture capital investment in our partnership, with numbers that represented more financial backing than I had imagined possible for a business that had existed for less than 2 months. "I'm prepared to offer $2 million in Series A funding," Victoria continued, in exchange for 30% equity and a seat on your advisory board. This investment would allow you to hire additional consultants, expand your service offerings, and pursue contracts with major healthcare systems throughout Texas and beyond. Rachel and I exchanged glances, both of us recognizing the magnitude of what Victoria was proposing. The investment would transform our partnership from a promising startup into a well-funded consulting firm capable of competing with established players in the market. The terms are generous, I said carefully, but I need to understand your long-term vision for this investment. What specific outcomes are you expecting to achieve? Victoria leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. Healthcare technology is experiencing unprecedented growth, driven by demographic changes and regulatory requirements that demand increasingly sophisticated marketing strategies. The consulting firms that currently dominate this space are too large to provide personalized service or too small to offer comprehensive solutions. Your partnership occupies the perfect middle ground. She outlined her vision for expanding our services into healthcare system consulting, medical device marketing, and pharmaceutical technology positioning. The scope was ambitious but achievable with proper funding and strategic guidance. There's another factor that makes this investment particularly attractive, Victoria continued. Your recent work with TechFlow Solutions has generated attention throughout Austin's business community. Companies are starting to recognize that traditional marketing agencies don't understand healthcare technology's unique challenges, and they're actively seeking alternatives. The mention of TechFlow created a moment of internal complexity, but I maintained my professional composure while acknowledging the validation it provided for our approach. Our analysis of David's company had not only served Stephen Walsh's immediate needs but also established our reputation for delivering results in challenging situations. What kind of timeline are you considering for this investment? Rachel asked, her voice steady despite the excitement I could see in her expression. I'd like to move quickly, Victoria replied. The healthcare technology market is evolving rapidly, and early movers have significant advantages. If you're interested in proceeding, we could have documentation completed within 2 weeks and funding available immediately thereafter. I felt a surge of possibility that was both exhilarating and overwhelming. The financial independence that Harper Strategic Consulting was providing had already exceeded my original goals, but Victoria's investment would create opportunities that extended far beyond my personal situation with David. We're definitely interested, I said, surprising myself with how decisively the words emerged. But I'd like to review the terms in detail and discuss the implications with our legal counsel before making a final commitment. Victoria nodded approvingly. Prudent approach. I'll have my team prepare complete documentation that addresses governance, growth expectations, and exit strategies. In the meantime, I'd like you to consider which additional team members you'd want to hire with the initial funding. The meeting continued for another hour, covering operational details and strategic priorities that would guide our expansion if we accepted Victoria's investment. By the time we concluded, I had a clear vision of how Harper Strategic Consulting could evolve from a personal escape plan into a significant business enterprise that would establish my professional identity, independent of any connection to David. As Victoria gathered her materials to leave, she made one final observation that resonated deeply with my current circumstances. Amanda, I've been following your transition from David Harper's wife to an independent consultant. The transformation has been remarkable, and it demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking that makes successful entrepreneurs. Her comment confirmed that my professional emergence had been noticed by Austin's business community, which meant that David's colleagues and contacts were likely aware of my consulting activities even if he remained oblivious. The implications were both encouraging and potentially problematic, depending on how David reacted when he eventually learned about my business success. Rachel and I spent the next 2 hours after Victoria's departure discussing the investment opportunity and its implications for our partnership. The funding would allow us to pursue opportunities that currently exceeded our capacity, but it would also create obligations and expectations that would fundamentally change the nature of our collaboration. "Are you ready for this level of commitment?" Rachel asked as we reviewed Victoria's term sheet. Once we accept venture capital funding, Harper Strategic Consulting becomes a serious business enterprise with growth targets and performance expectations that go far beyond your original goals. I considered her question carefully, weighing the personal and professional implications of the decision. The business had begun as a pathway to financial independence during my divorce from David, but it had evolved into something more significant than I had originally envisioned. "I'm ready," I said finally. "Actually, I think I've been ready for this kind of challenge for years. I just needed the circumstances that would allow me to pursue it authentically." My phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Meeting with Stephen went badly. He's implementing new protocols for healthcare clients and wants individual performance reviews for everyone in my division. This is really serious, Amanda. I might need to consider other options." The message provided a window into how our tech flow analysis was affecting his professional situation, but it also revealed his characteristic approach to challenges. Rather than acknowledging performance issues and working to address them, David was already contemplating escape strategies that would allow him to avoid accountability. I responded with appropriate sympathy, while noting the irony that his wife was simultaneously negotiating deals that would establish her as a major player in the same industry where his career was faltering. "I'm sorry to hear it's been difficult. Maybe this is an opportunity to demonstrate your problem-solving skills?" His response came quickly. "Problem-solving won't help if Stephen has already decided there are systematic issues with our division. Sometimes the best strategy is to recognize when it's time to move on." The casual dismissal of responsibility was so characteristic of David's approach to challenges that I almost smiled despite the gravity of his situation. The same man who was planning to abandon our marriage when it became inconvenient was now considering abandoning his career when it required actual effort to maintain his position. Rachel and I spent the remainder of the day developing responses to Victoria's investment proposal and identifying the legal and financial advisors we would need to manage the complexity of venture capital funding. The process required careful coordination with Nicole Reed, who would need to ensure that my business activities remained properly separated from joint assets that might be subject to divorce proceedings. By evening, I had a preliminary agreement framework that protected my interests while allowing Harper Strategic Consulting to accept Victoria's investment and pursue rapid growth. The financial implications were significant, not just for my immediate independence, but for my long-term security and professional fulfillment. David was already home when I returned, sitting in his office with documents spread across his desk and a tension in his posture that suggested his day had continued to deteriorate after his morning meeting with Stephen Walsh. I knocked gently on his doorframe before entering, maintaining the supportive wife persona that had become increasingly surreal to perform. "How are you holding up?" I asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. David looked up with exhaustion evident in his expression. "Stephen is implementing immediate changes to our healthcare client management protocols. Everyone in my division has to complete additional training on industry-specific communication strategies, and we're getting quarterly performance reviews instead of annual ones." The changes Stephen was implementing aligned perfectly with the recommendations Rachel and I had provided, but I maintained an expression of sympathetic concern, while David described the accountability measures that would likely improve TechFlow's client satisfaction significantly. "That sounds comprehensive," I said. "Maybe it's an opportunity to demonstrate your adaptability and commitment to improving client relationships." David's laugh was bitter. "Amanda, you don't understand how corporate politics work. When senior management starts implementing new protocols, because of consultant recommendations, it means they've already decided there are problems that need fixing. The training and reviews aren't opportunities to improve. They're documentation for personnel decisions that have already been made." His analysis was probably accurate, which meant that our work for Stephen Walsh was having exactly the impact we had anticipated. The systematic issues in David's division weren't just performance problems, but career-limiting patterns that would affect his prospects at TechFlow regardless of how well he adapted to the new requirements. Have you considered that this might be a chance to reset your reputation and demonstrate growth? I suggested, genuinely curious about whether he had the capacity for self-reflection that would allow him to address the feedback constructively. David's expression hardened slightly. The problem isn't my performance, Amanda. It's the unrealistic expectations that healthcare clients have developed. They want account managers who understand medical industry regulations and patient care dynamics, but that's not what TechFlow hired me to provide. I'm a technology solutions specialist, not a healthcare consultant. The response perfectly captured the dismissive attitude toward client expertise that our analysis had identified as a core problem in his approach to account management. David genuinely believed that his client's industry knowledge was less relevant than his technical capabilities, which explained why healthcare executives consistently reported feeling patronized by his team. Maybe the training will help bridge that gap, I offered, though I suspected that David's fundamental attitude toward client relationships wouldn't change regardless of additional education. The training is just corporate theater, he replied dismissively. Stephen is trying to show that he's addressing the issues the consultants identified, but the real solution is recognizing that healthcare clients need different kinds of account management than we're equipped to provide. I nodded thoughtfully while marveling at how completely David missed the irony of his situation. The woman sitting across from his desk had built a successful consulting business specifically by understanding healthcare clients' unique needs and developing strategies that address them effectively. But his perception of my capabilities remained so limited that he couldn't imagine I might have insights relevant to his professional challenges. "What are you thinking about doing?" I asked. David leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to the calculating look I recognized as his strategic planning mode. "I've been getting calls from recruiters lately. Austin's tech market is competitive and companies are always looking for experienced directors with strong client portfolios. This might be the perfect time to explore other opportunities." The revelation that David was already considering leaving TechFlow added another layer of complexity to the situation. If he resigned before Stephen completed the performance review process, it would eliminate the accountability measures that were designed to address the problems our analysis had identified. "That seems like a significant decision," I said carefully. "Have you discussed it with Stephen?" "God, no," David replied quickly. "You never let your current employer know you're exploring other options until you have something definite to announce. Stephen would probably accelerate whatever personnel decisions he's planning if he thought I was already looking elsewhere." The response revealed David's assumption that Stephen was planning negative personnel decisions, which suggested that his meeting had gone even worse than his text messages had indicated. The strategic recommendations Rachel and I had provided were clearly having immediate impact on how TechFlow's leadership viewed the performance of their healthcare division. "What kind of opportunities are the recruiters discussing?" I asked, genuinely curious about how his reputation was perceived in Austin's broader technology community. David's expression brightened for the first time since I'd entered his office. "Senior director positions at companies that are focused on growth rather than bureaucratic accountability measures. Organizations that value results over process documentation." The description suggested that David was gravitating toward companies that would allow him to continue his established approach to client relationships rather than environments that would require him to develop new capabilities. It was entirely consistent with his pattern of avoiding challenges that demanded genuine change or growth. As our conversation continued, I found myself studying David with the detached curiosity of someone observing a specimen rather than supporting a spouse. The man I had once loved was clearly visible beneath the professional anxiety and entitled frustration, but he was increasingly overshadowed by patterns of behavior that had likely contributed to both our marital problems and his current career difficulties. "I should let you get back to your preparation," I said finally, standing to leave his office. Is there anything I can do to help with the training materials or performance review documentation? David looked up with genuine surprise at my offer. Thanks, but this is pretty technical stuff. I don't think you'd find it interesting. The casual dismissal of my potential contributions was so automatic that David didn't even seem to recognize it as dismissive. The woman who had built a successful healthcare technology consulting business was apparently still perceived as someone whose interest in technical business matters would be superficial at best. Well, I'm here if you need anything, I said, maintaining the supportive tone that had become second nature over 8 years of marriage. As I left David's office and returned to the guest bedroom that had become my professional sanctuary, I reflected on the stark contrast between his perception of my capabilities and the reality of what I had accomplished in just a few weeks. While he struggled with performance issues that stemmed from his inability to understand client perspectives, I was negotiating venture capital investments based on exactly that kind of strategic insight. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so indicative of the fundamental disconnection that had characterized our relationship for years. David had never bothered to recognize my professional potential because doing so would have required acknowledging that his success depended partly on contributions he had consistently undervalued. My laptop chimed with an email from Nicole Reed, containing preliminary divorce documentation that she had prepared based on our discussions about timing and strategy. The papers were comprehensive and carefully crafted to protect my interests, while accounting for the business assets I had developed independently of David's knowledge or support. Amanda, Nicole had written in her accompanying message, the financial disclosure forms we prepared last week will need to be updated to reflect the potential venture capital investment. If Victoria Santos's funding comes through, it will significantly strengthen your negotiating position and long-term financial security. I opened the documents and reviewed the settlement terms that Nicole had outlined based on my current business success and projected income. The numbers were substantially different from what they would have been if I had discovered David's affair without having built Harper Strategic Consulting first. The woman who had overheard his dismissive conversation about her future would have been negotiating from a position of financial dependence and limited options. The woman who was now reviewing comprehensive legal documentation had resources, prospects, and strategic advantages that would allow her to define her post-divorce life according to her own preferences, rather than David's assumptions about her. Capabilities. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Santos. Amanda, I wanted to follow up on our meeting today. I've been thinking about your situation and the timing of our potential partnership. If you're interested, I'd like to accelerate our timeline and have funding available within 1 week rather than 2. There are opportunities emerging in the healthcare technology market that we should move quickly to capture. The message represented an acceleration of possibilities that I hadn't anticipated, but it also aligned perfectly with the timeline I was developing for confronting David about his affair and filing for divorce. The strategic convergence wasn't coincidental, but rather the result of careful planning that was finally creating the circumstances I needed to act decisively. I responded to Victoria's message with enthusiasm and agreement to the accelerated timeline, then opened a new document on my laptop to outline the sequence of events that would unfold over the next week. The planning that had begun with champagne shattering on marble floors was approaching its culmination, and every element was positioned to ensure that I emerged from this transformation with both financial independence and professional fulfillment. David remained completely unaware that his wife was orchestrating circumstances that would fundamentally redefine their relationship and his understanding of her capabilities. The woman he thought was already gone was not only still present, but actively creating the future that would prove exactly how wrong his assessment had been. Tomorrow would bring new developments in both his professional crisis and my business expansion, and the convergence of these parallel tracks was approaching the moment when David would finally learn who Amanda Harper really was beneath the supportive wife persona he had taken for granted for so many years. The divorce papers sat on the kitchen counter like an elegant death sentence, their crisp white pages catching the morning sunlight that streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows. I had placed them there deliberately, positioned where David would see them immediately when he came down for his morning coffee. After 6 weeks of strategic planning and careful execution, the moment of revelation had finally arrived. My phone showed 17 missed calls from David's number, along with a stream of increasingly frantic text messages that had started arriving at 5:30 in the morning. "Amanda, where are you? We need to talk immediately." "This is insane. You can't be serious about this." "Call me back right now." The progression from confusion to anger to desperation was predictable, but the intensity surprised me. Apparently, discovering that his wife had initiated divorce proceedings while he was planning to discard her had shattered his sense of control more thoroughly than I had anticipated. I was sitting in Victoria Santos's office, putting the finishing touches on the investment agreement that would inject $2 million into Harper Strategic Consulting and establish my business as a major player in Austin's healthcare technology market. The timing wasn't coincidental. I had orchestrated this morning carefully, ensuring that David would discover my legal papers at precisely the moment when I was securing the financial independence that made his opinion of my capabilities irrelevant. "The final signatures look perfect," Victoria said, reviewing the documents with satisfaction. "I have to say, Amanda, your timing on this investment is impeccable. The market conditions are ideal, and your client portfolio positions us perfectly for rapid expansion." I smiled, thinking about the multiple layers of timing she couldn't possibly understand. While David was likely calling in sick to TechFlow Solutions to deal with his personal crisis, I was officially becoming a funded entrepreneur with resources that would allow me to compete in markets he had never imagined I could access. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Victoria continued, her expression becoming more serious. "I've been hearing rumors about significant changes at TechFlow Solutions. Apparently, their healthcare division is undergoing major restructuring, based on some consulting analysis that revealed systematic performance issues." The mention of TechFlow created a moment of internal complexity, though I maintained my professional composure while acknowledging the information. Austin's tech community is relatively small. News travels quickly when major companies make strategic adjustments. Victoria nodded knowingly. The interesting part is that several TechFlow employees in their healthcare division are apparently exploring other opportunities, companies that are more aligned with their career goals and growth expectations. Her comment suggested that David wasn't the only TechFlow employee whose performance review had created incentives to seek employment elsewhere. The systemic issues that Rachel and I had identified were apparently prompting broader personnel changes that extended beyond David's individual situation. Market disruption often creates opportunities for talented professionals to find better fits with their skills and interests, I replied diplomatically. Though privately, I was fascinated by how comprehensively our analysis had affected TechFlow's healthcare operations. Victoria signed the final investment documents with a flourish that made our partnership official. "Welcome to the portfolio, Amanda. I'm excited to see what Harper Strategic Consulting accomplishes with proper funding and strategic support." As I left Victoria's office building with signed agreements that represented more financial backing than I had dreamed possible 6 weeks earlier, my phone rang with David's name appearing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to engage with his crisis while I was still processing the magnitude of what I had just accomplished. The drive back to our house gave me time to prepare mentally for the confrontation that would inevitably follow. David's reaction to the divorce papers would likely be a combination of shock, anger, and desperate attempts to regain control of a situation that had already moved far beyond his influence. The woman he thought was already gone was about to demonstrate exactly how present and powerful she had become. I pulled into our circular driveway to find David's Tesla parked at an unusual angle, as if he had arrived home in considerable haste. Through the kitchen windows, I could see him pacing back and forth, His phone pressed to his ear in what appeared to be an agitated conversation. The divorce papers were no longer on the counter, which meant he had discovered them and was likely seeking advice from someone about how to respond to this unexpected development. I entered through the front door with deliberate calm, my demeanor composed despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. David appeared in the hallway immediately, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief that would have been intimidating 6 weeks ago, but now seemed merely pathetic. "What the hell is this supposed to mean?" he demanded, waving the divorce papers with shaking hands. "Amanda, we need to talk about this rationally. You can't just end an 8-year marriage with legal documents delivered by courier." I set down my purse and removed my jacket with unhurried precision, noting how his agitation contrasted with my own sense of clarity and purpose. "Actually, David, that's exactly how marriages end when one spouse has been planning to discard the other while maintaining the pretense of partnership." His expression shifted to confusion, as if he couldn't understand how I might have learned about his intentions or his relationship with another woman. The possibility that his wife possessed intelligence and strategic thinking capabilities apparently hadn't occurred to him even now. "I don't know what you think you know," he said, his voice taking on the placating tone he used when attempting to manage difficult situations. "But whatever it is, we can work through it together. Marriage requires communication and compromise, not dramatic gestures." I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, using the moment to appreciate the irony of his appeal to communication in a relationship where he had systematically dismissed my attempts to contribute meaningfully to our shared decisions. "You're absolutely right about communication being important in marriage," I agreed, turning to face him with the counter between us. "Which is why I found it so enlightening to overhear your phone conversation with your girlfriend 6 weeks ago, when you explained that your wife was already gone and just didn't know it yet." The color drained from David's face as he realized that his carefully managed double life had been exposed. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly for several seconds, before he managed to formulate a response. "Amanda, that conversation was taken out of context. Karen and I have developed a friendship, but it's not what you're imagining. She's helped me work through some of the challenges in our marriage, providing perspective on how to improve our relationship." The explanation was so transparently false that I almost laughed at his audacity. The man who had been planning his exit strategy while dismissing my worth was now attempting to reframe his affair as marriage counseling with a concerned friend. "David, I have documentation of your relationship with Karen, including text messages. She accidentally sent to my phone an evidence of your shared activities over the past several months." The marriage counseling explanation is creative, but it's not particularly convincing. His expression hardened as he realized that his standard tactics of deflection and reframing wouldn't be effective in this conversation. The woman who had accepted his explanations for years had apparently developed the capacity for independent verification of his claims. "Fine," he said, his tone shifting to aggressive defensiveness. "Maybe I have been seeing someone else, but that doesn't justify ending our marriage without trying to address the underlying problems that led to this situation. Marriages go through difficult periods, Amanda. Mature couples work through them rather than running away." I sipped my water while considering his attempt to position my response to his betrayal as an immature overreaction rather than a reasonable consequence of his deliberate deception. "You're right that marriages face challenges," I replied calmly. "But successful marriages require both partners to value each other's contributions and work toward shared goals. Our marriage has been a one-sided arrangement where I provided support for your ambitions while you dismissed my capabilities and planned your eventual escape." David's expression grew more desperate as he recognized that his usual strategies for managing my behavior weren't producing the desired results. "Amanda, I know I haven't always been the most attentive husband, but that doesn't mean I don't value you. We can go to counseling, take a vacation, whatever it takes to rebuild what we had." The offer of counseling from a man who had been conducting an affair while planning to leave me was so absurd that I couldn't suppress a slight smile. David, we can't rebuild something that never existed. You've never valued my contributions, because you've never bothered to understand what they were. He stepped closer, his voice taking on the urgent tone he used when attempting to close important business deals. Of course I understand your contributions. You've been an incredible partner, managing our social life and supporting my career in ways that made everything else possible. I couldn't have achieved what I have without your help. The summary of my role in our marriage as social coordinator and career support system perfectly captured his fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I was capable of accomplishing independently. That's an interesting perspective. On my contributions, I said, walking to the guest bedroom and returning with a laptop that displayed the Harper Strategic Consulting website. But it seems to overlook some recent developments in my professional activities. David stared at the screen with growing confusion as he scrolled through client testimonials, service offerings, and strategic frameworks that demonstrated expertise he had never associated with his wife. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to grasp the implications of what he was seeing. "Harper Strategic Consulting is my business, David. The one I've been building over the past 6 weeks while you were planning your exit strategy with Karen. The one that specializes in healthcare technology marketing and has generated over $100,000 in revenue during its first month of operation." The numbers clearly stunned him, but I could see him struggling to reconcile this information with his assumptions about my capabilities and motivations. "Amanda, this is incredible," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and concern. "But why didn't you tell me you were working on something this significant? We could have discussed how to integrate it with our financial planning and my career development." The response revealed his instinctive assumption that my business success should be subordinated to his strategic priorities, even after learning that he had been planning to leave our marriage. "I didn't discuss it with you because I knew you would either dismiss it as impractical or attempt to control it for your own benefit," I replied honestly. "Harper Strategic Consulting exists because I finally recognized that my professional value doesn't require your validation or approval." David set down the laptop and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that indicated he was beginning to understand that this conversation wasn't proceeding according to any script he had anticipated. "How long have you known about Karen?" he asked finally, apparently deciding that direct questions might provide better information than continued deflection. 6 weeks, I replied. "Since the night I overheard you telling her that your wife was already gone but just didn't know it yet." That conversation was quite illuminating about how you perceive our marriage and my future prospects. He winced at the reminder of his casual dismissal of my agency in determining our relationship's outcome. "Amanda, you have to understand that I was frustrated and confused about our marriage. Karen helped me process those feelings, but it wasn't supposed to become a serious relationship." The explanation suggested that his affair had evolved beyond his original intentions, which created interesting implications for how he had been managing his promises to both women. "What were your plans for ending our marriage?" I asked, genuinely curious about the timeline and methodology he had developed for discarding me. David's expression became even more uncomfortable as he realized that his strategic planning was now subject to scrutiny by the woman he had been planning to surprise with his decision. "I was waiting for my promotion to come through," he admitted, reluctantly. "I wanted to make sure I could provide adequate financial support during the transition, and I thought it would be easier to handle the logistics once my position at TechFlow was more secure." The casual assumption that he would be the one providing financial support during our divorce was particularly amusing, given the investment agreement I had signed that morning and the business success he was only now discovering. "That was thoughtful of you," I said with gentle irony. "Though it might interest you to know that my financial security is no longer dependent on your career success or your definitions of adequate support." I showed him the investment agreement with Victoria Santos, watching his expression change. as he processed the implications of my business receiving $2 million in venture capital funding. "Amanda, this is unbelievable," he said, though whether he meant the investment itself or my capacity to secure it without his knowledge wasn't clear. "How did you manage to attract this level of funding so quickly?" The question revealed his genuine bewilderment about how I had accomplished something significant without his involvement or awareness. The possibility that his wife possessed professional capabilities that exceeded his own understanding had apparently never entered his consideration. Harper Strategic Consulting attracted investment because it provides valuable services that address real market needs, I explained. Victoria Santos recognized the potential for growth in healthcare technology consulting, and she decided to support my vision for expanding the business. David studied the investment documents with the focused attention he usually reserved for his own professional materials. "The terms are incredibly favorable. Amanda, do you realize what this means for your long-term financial position?" I smiled at his belated recognition of what I had accomplished while he was focused on his own exit strategy. "I realize exactly what it means, David. It means that Amanda Harper is no longer economically dependent on David Harper's career success or personal decisions. The use of our names as separate entities rather than a unified couple clearly registered, with him as a fundamental shift in how I conceptualized our relationship." "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice carrying a resignation that suggested he was beginning to understand that this conversation would not conclude with reconciliation and renewed commitment to our marriage. I walked to the kitchen counter and retrieved the second set of documents I had prepared for this moment. "Now we proceed with divorce mediation according to the terms outlined in these financial disclosure statements. My attorney has prepared a settlement proposal that accounts for both our current assets and our respective future earning potentials." David opened the documents and began reading with the careful attention that significant legal agreements demanded. As he progressed through the financial analysis, his expression shifted from confusion to surprise to something approaching respect. "Amanda, these projections for your business income are substantial," he said, looking up from the papers with a new awareness of the economic implications of our separation. "If Harper Strategic Consulting performs according to these estimates, you'll be earning significantly more than my current salary within 2 years." The recognition that his wife might become more financially successful than him was clearly a development he hadn't anticipated when planning his departure from our marriage. "The projections are conservative," I replied. "Victoria Santos believes the market opportunity is even larger than these estimates suggest, particularly as healthcare systems recognize the value of specialized marketing expertise." David continued reading, occasionally shaking his head in apparent amazement at the thoroughness of the documentation and the strategic sophistication of my business planning. "There's something else you should know," I said as he neared the end of the financial disclosure. "Harper Strategic Consulting has been working with TechFlow Solutions on a comprehensive analysis of their healthcare division performance. The consulting work that Stephen Walsh has been implementing was developed by my partnership with Rachel Kim's analytics firm. The revelation that his wife had been directly involved in the performance review process that was threatening his career created a moment of stunned silence that stretched for nearly a minute. "You've been working on the TechFlow analysis?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel and I provided Stephen Walsh with comprehensive recommendations for improving client satisfaction in the healthcare division," I confirmed. "The performance issues and communication problems we identified were based on objective data analysis and client feedback documentation." David sank into a kitchen chair as the full implications of this information settled over him. The professional crisis that had been consuming his attention for the past week had been orchestrated by the wife he had dismissed as economically dependent and professionally irrelevant. "Amanda, do you understand what this means for my career?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to grasp the strategic sophistication of my planning. I understand that your career will be determined by your ability to address the performance issues that our analysis identified, replied. The same issues that Margaret Foster and other healthcare clients have been raising about TechFlow's account management approach. The mention of Margaret Foster prompted another moment of recognition, as David connected the various elements of the situation he found himself confronting. Margaret Foster is your client, he said, the statement carrying the weight of revelation rather than question. Margaret Foster hired Harper Strategic Consulting to develop marketing strategies that better serve her company's growth objectives, I confirmed. The disconnect between her needs and TechFlow's service delivery became apparent during our strategic collaboration. David stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, as if he were meeting a stranger who happened to resemble his wife. The woman he thought he knew well enough to discard casually had not only anticipated his betrayal, but had systematically positioned herself to emerge from their marriage with greater financial security and professional prospects than he currently enjoyed. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "I've been planning Harper Strategic Consulting for over a year," I said honestly. "But I've been planning our divorce since the night I overheard you tell Karen that your wife was already gone." "You were right about that, David. Amanda Harper, the supportive wife, was already gone, but Amanda Harper, the independent professional, was just getting started." The distinction between the woman he had been married to and the woman sitting across from him was becoming clearer, with each revelation about my business activities and strategic planning. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally, his voice carrying a defeat that contrasted sharply with the confident dismissal I had overheard 6 weeks earlier. I considered his question carefully, recognizing it as an acknowledgement that he no longer controlled the terms of our separation or the timeline for its completion. "I want you to sign the divorce agreement and allow us both to move forward with our lives according to our own preferences and capabilities," I said simply. "You wanted the freedom to pursue your relationship with Karen without the complication of being married to someone you considered already gone. I'm providing you with exactly that opportunity." David nodded slowly, apparently recognizing that the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. The strategic planning that had begun with his casual dismissal of my agency had culminated in circumstances that granted him the independence he had wanted, while ensuring that I emerged with resources and opportunities that exceeded anything he had imagined possible. "The mediation is scheduled for next week," I added, gathering the legal documents that would formalize the end of our marriage. "My attorney will coordinate with yours to finalize the settlement terms and asset division." As I prepared to leave the kitchen, David made one final attempt to understand the transformation he was witnessing. "Amanda, the woman I married 8 years ago, couldn't have accomplished what you've built with Harper Strategic Consulting. When did you become someone I don't recognize?" I paused at the doorway, considering how to respond to his question about when I had changed from the person he thought he had married. "I didn't become someone you don't recognize, David," I said finally. "I became someone you never bothered to see. The difference is that I finally stopped waiting for your permission to be who I really am." The sound of my footsteps on the stairs echoed through the house as I left David sitting at the kitchen table with divorce papers and the realization that the woman he thought was already gone had not only been present the entire time, but had been orchestrating the circumstances that would ultimately define both their futures. Harper Strategic Consulting's success was just beginning, and Amanda Harper's independence was no longer a plan in development, but a reality that belonged entirely to the woman who had finally recognized her own worth without requiring external validation. The transformation was complete, and the future stretched ahead with possibilities that were limited only by my own vision and determination, rather than by anyone else's assumptions about what I was capable of achieving. 6 months later, I stood in the gleaming conference room of Harper Strategic Consulting's new headquarters, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as Austin's skyline stretched toward the horizon. The office space occupied 2 floors of a prestigious downtown building, with a team of 12 consultants who specialized in healthcare technology marketing strategies that major corporations across Texas now sought eagerly. The transformation was complete in ways I could never have imagined that night when champagne shattered against marble, and David's words shattered my illusions about our marriage. Harper's strategic consulting had exceeded every growth projection Victoria Santos had outlined, securing contracts with healthcare systems throughout the Southwest, and establishing partnerships with medical device manufacturers who valued our unique approach to reaching clinical decision-makers. My assistant knocked gently on the conference room door. "Ms. Harper, the call with the Dallas Medical Center is ready whenever you are. They're eager to discuss the comprehensive rebranding strategy for their new cardiac facility." I nodded, gathering the presentation materials that represented months of strategic development and market research. The Dallas Medical Center contract would be worth more than David's annual salary at TechFlow, a comparison that no longer carried emotional weight, but served as a useful metric for measuring how completely my circumstances had evolved. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago with terms that reflected the financial independence I had built rather than any dependence on David's income or assets. He had signed the agreement without contest, perhaps recognizing that attempting to challenge a settlement that favored his soon-to-be ex-wife's superior earning potential would only highlight how thoroughly he had misjudged her capabilities. David had indeed left TechFlow Solutions, though not under the circumstances he had originally envisioned. Stephen Walsh's performance review process had revealed systematic issues that extended beyond individual account management problems, leading to a restructuring that eliminated several positions in the healthcare division. David's departure had been framed as a mutual decision to pursue opportunities that better aligned with his career objectives, but the timing suggested less voluntary circumstances. According to Rachel, who maintained professional relationships throughout Austin's tech community, David had taken a position with a smaller company that focused on traditional business software rather than healthcare technology. The role represented a step backward in terms of responsibility and compensation, but it apparently provided the kind of environment where his established approach to client relationships faced less scrutiny. Karen, his girlfriend who had accidentally texted me months earlier, had also moved on to other relationships according to social media updates that I occasionally glimpsed through mutual acquaintances. The romance that had seemed so compelling when it represented forbidden excitement had apparently lost its appeal once it became a legitimate relationship without the thrill of deception. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, who was attending the Texas Healthcare Innovation Summit in Houston. "Amanda, you need to see this. David is here representing his new company, and he just asked me about Harper Strategic Consulting's client acquisition strategies." The irony is unbelievable. I smiled at the message, imagining David attempting to understand how his former wife had built a business that was outperforming his own career trajectory. The man who had once dismissed my professional potential was now apparently seeking insights about my success from mutual colleagues. The Dallas Medical Center call proceeded smoothly, with executives who appreciated both the strategic depth of our recommendations and the healthcare industry expertise that informed every aspect of our approach. By the time we concluded, I had secured a contract that would expand Harper Strategic Consulting's presence into the Dallas market and establish relationships with medical professionals who could provide referrals to other healthcare systems. As evening approached, I prepared to leave the office and attend a networking reception for Austin's Women in Business organization. The invitation had arrived with a note indicating that I would be recognized as Entrepreneur of the Year for building a successful consulting firm that had created jobs and contributed to the local economy's growth. The recognition felt surreal in the best possible way, representing validation from a community that valued achievement and innovation rather than conformity to traditional expectations. The woman who had once organized dinner parties to support her husband's career was now being celebrated for her own professional accomplishments by peers who understood the challenges of building something meaningful from nothing. My reflection was interrupted by a knock on my office door. Victoria Santos entered with a bottle of champagne and an expression of satisfaction that suggested she had news to share. "Amanda, I wanted to deliver this update personally," she said, setting the champagne on my desk. "Harper Strategic Consulting has been selected as the lead consultant for the new Texas Medical Technology Initiative. The state is investing $50 million in healthcare innovation, and they want our team to develop the marketing and business development strategies for the entire program." The announcement represented an opportunity that would establish Harper Strategic Consulting as a major player in Texas healthcare technology consulting, while providing the kind of high-profile project that would attract national attention from potential clients and partners. "This is incredible, Victoria," I said, genuinely amazed by the scope of what she was describing. "How did we come to their attention for something this significant?" Victoria smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated this. Question: "Your work with the Dallas Medical Center caught the attention of state healthcare policy officials. They were impressed by the strategic approach and the measurable results you achieved in such a short time frame. Plus, the fact that you built this business from nothing in less than a year demonstrates exactly the kind of entrepreneurial innovation they want to support." As Victoria opened the champagne and poured 2 glasses, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had overheard her husband planning to discard her had transformed that moment of devastating clarity into the foundation for building something that belonged entirely to her own vision and capabilities. "To recognizing your own worth," Victoria said, raising her glass in a toast that captured the essence of what Harper Strategic Consulting represented beyond its financial success or professional recognition. "To never waiting for permission to become who you're meant to be," I replied, thinking about the champagne that had once stained my blouse and now sparkled with possibilities that stretched far beyond anything I had imagined possible. The future held challenges and opportunities that would test and expand my capabilities in ways I couldn't yet anticipate. But unlike the woman who had once defined her worth through someone else's approval, I was ready to meet those challenges with confidence in my own judgment and excitement about what I could accomplish when I trusted my own vision. David had been right about one thing during that overheard conversation months ago. His wife was already gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most powerful transformation begins with recognizing that you were never actually diminished, just temporarily convinced to see yourself through someone else's limited perspective. Harper Strategic Consulting's success was just the beginning, and Amanda Harper's story was being written by the only person qualified to determine its direction. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.